Development Commission hearing in Lincoln County. It's December 18th. Oh, let me start again. Welcome back to the Land Conservation and Development Commission hearing in Lincoln County. Today's I'm advancing the schedule. I said December, November 18th, 2022. We just got back from a tour. And I would like to hear a few words from Director Bateman on our tour.
I just wanted to say a few words about how incredibly wonderful this morning's tour was. Couldn't have ordered up a more beautiful day and a more beautiful place with some incredible storytelling and some very passionate speakers who were sharing some of their recent and future work with us. In particular, I wanted to thank our staff, Brett and Mandy. Thank you very much for not just today, but this entire experience. This has been an incredible getaway and venue for us. And I know that you are also supported here on site and also remotely by a number of staff who also were key, central to making this happen. So I wanted to thank our entire DLCD staff as well. And then in particular, coming off of this field trip, wanted to thank Commissioner Jacobson for her tour of Otis and the Grange this morning of the fire damaged areas, and for all of the work that we understand she played and that she did to help with fire recovery. It was pretty incredible and rather overwhelming. So thank you, Commissioner. From there, we went on a little bus tour and got some housing updates about Lincoln City itself from Allison Robertson, Economic Development Manager for Lincoln City, and from Anne Marie Skinner, Community Development Director from Lincoln City. So we did kind of a drive through there and got to see some sites that are being prepared for some really innovative and much needed affordable housing coming to the community soon. So that was very inspirational. And then from there, we went down onto the sand at Glen Eden Beach and looked at a little bit of Goal 18 work and had some very passionate remarks from Mr. Anna Husing, planning director for Lincoln County, and what an incredible experience that was, and a real learning experience too. So altogether, a great program. Thank you for sharing that with commissioners and staff and taking time from your day. Also of note today, celebrations. Taylor, you didn't think you were going to get away with. She's back around the corner. It's Taylor Sorgenfried's birthday today. So happy birthday, Taylor. There are some cupcakes out there. Please eat them so that I don't have to take them home. And the only other thing that I wanted to say before we launch into our afternoon is please lean into your microphones or else we won't be able to hear you, and neither will our remote viewers. So thank you very much. We're looking forward to your presentations this afternoon.
And so with that, we're going to begin agenda item number 13, Regional Solutions Team Regional Summary. Regional Solutions Team led by Patrick Wingard, South Willamette Valley Regional Representative. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Wingard. I'm the Southern Willamette Valley Regional Representative. Chair Helova, Vice Chair Lelak, members of the commission, thrilled to be here. With me today, we have members of the South Valley Mid-Coast Regional Solutions Team, and I'll give them a moment to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. I'm Melissa Murphy. I'm the Regional Development Officer with Business Oregon, which is the state's economic development agency and part of the Regional Solutions Team.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Camerata. I'm with the Department of Environmental Quality, and I've been on the RST for many, many years. I really love this program.
Hi, I'm Mark Bernard. I am Principal Planner for Region 2 at ODOT, and I'm glad to be here as well.
And hi, I'm Nate Stice. I'm Governor Brown's Economy and Jobs Policy Advisor and Regional Solutions Director. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some faces of folks that I've only talked to on the phone. So, and I always appreciate this commission inviting Regional Solutions to do these presentations. Your staff are key members of our teams and important to our work. And appreciate that you make this time. So I think you are all familiar with Regional Solutions. For the sake of just saying it, that Regional Solutions is the governor's collaborative approach to community and economic development. It has a long history going back to a governor who was important to this institution as well, Tom McCall, and has had many iterations over time. But it all rests on the collaborative work of this folks like these ones here who sit down with communities and help empower them to solve problems. So really grateful for the partnership again of your agency and your commission and empowering that work. And I was down at AOC with Director Bateman, the Association of Orange County Conference with Director Bateman, and probably with with Nick as well. I didn't get to say hi to you there. And was over on this side of the state. I call the Dallas home, but I have been covering for the South Valley region for, oh God, I don't know, almost a year now since our coordinator left, and also Central Oregon. But I drove over here to say one thing, that this group is the gold standard for Regional Solutions team. They are doing excellent work, maybe despite the staffing in the governor's office for the Regional Solutions program at the moment. And they have made it easy to continue and carry the work forward. And, in large part, thanks to folks like Patrick Wingard here, who is also the gold standard for your regional representatives. So I just wanted to come here and say that they're doing awesome work. I'm excited to see the presentation, and they'll go more into the details of it. But if you ever need help getting a project move forward, talk to these guys. And, I know that they'll carry the work forward into the next administration as well. So now I'm going to go to the beach.
Thank you, Nate. It's a lot to live up to, but I think we are there. Okay, so let's get into it. Just setting the context a bit for Lincoln County, where we sit today. Lincoln County is a growing coastal community with 2 cities, over 10,000 population. Much credit to the staff and the elected officials in the cities of Newport, cities of Lincoln City, all of the cities in Lincoln County. They do great work. They are engaged with their citizens, with the population, and we have a great collaboration with the city's elected officials in Lincoln County. It's just a pleasure to be here. I wanted to take a moment to explain to you why the South Valley Mid-Coast Regional Solutions team is here with you today. You see Brett Estes, our North Coast Regional Representative. So it's a little unique in the way that DLCD has constructed its regional representative. One sec, folks. Well, we haven't gotten any of the good slides yet.
Patrick, I'm going to take a moment to jump in here and thank someone that I forgot that was central to this morning's tour, and that's Meg Reed. I hope you didn't think I forgot you. She was instrumental in giving us some additional vocabulary and terminology and knowledge about the coast as well. So thank you, Meg.
Thank you, Director Bateman. Chair Halova, Vice Chair Lilac, and members of the commission, I will continue. So I wanted to take a moment because Lincoln County is positioned, I think, very well with the department in the Regional Solutions program, because you don't have one regional representative or 2 regional representatives. You actually have 3 DLCD regional representatives with stakes and interests in Lincoln County. Huey Radomski, our South Coast representative, covers the cities of Yachats and Waldport. Brett covers all of the rest of Lincoln County, except for projects that fall into the often port projects that involve multiple state agencies, federal partners. large projects, transportation projects, often will become something that the regional solutions team dives into. Okay, that's one. We have a couple of items that we want to touch on today. We know that you all have been spending time, particularly with Commissioner Jacobson, in regard to wildfire. We wanted to take a moment to share with you from Business Oregon's perspective, Department of Environmental Quality and ODOT, some of the work that went on in the recovery to the Otis unincorporated community and in particular, the Panther Creek subdivision. Melissa?
First, I want to say that there is a mistake on this slide. I think that Commissioner Jacobson can already see it. I saw your face. It's okay. We put this together fast. It was my fault for not catching that. In general, and we'll correct the mistake later, but in general, there was over $15 million that came into the county for fire recovery. Some of that was through the American Rescue Plan Act. Some of it was through the Municipal Wildfire Assistance Program. Sorry, the MWAP is what we've been calling it for so long. I forgot what it stood for. Some of it came through our regular programs like the Safe Drinking Water Fund and through USDA programs. Most of it came directly to the county, or it went to Panther Creek Water District. There is an actual water district in north of the county that is needed to be repaired during the fires. They were also having some issues prior to the fire. But one of the things that we were able to do with that money was direct some of the ARPA funds to that water district to do the repairs that they needed to make sure that they could also be bringing on other rural communities. We have a lot of small water communities up there, communities that need water or have maybe failing wells, or they just don't have access during an emergency. And we're hoping that we will be able to do some consolidation of needs in the North County area with that ARPA funds and the Panther Creek Water District. I think that's good for unless somebody has any questions about the specifics, but that is the generalized amount of money that came in for fire recovery. We do other work here in the county on a regular basis with all of our infrastructure funds. Half of the agency is infrastructure, half of it is more typical business development with awards going directly to businesses and communities for economic development. But their whole half of the agency is just managing infrastructure programs for municipally owned infrastructure. So I work with all of the communities, all the special districts, the commissioners here on needed infrastructure improvements, on economic development opportunities. There's always something going on in Lincoln County for sure. Good.
Thanks, Melissa.
Mary.
To Mary.
Sorry.
So I want to talk about the sort of the first emergency response that happened. So you can imagine, the fires came and there was a lot of burnt out debris, and the state with Oregon Emergency Management leaped into action, and you got the hazardous declaration. And so what happened is the first thing you had to do was remove the hazardous materials. You could imagine we have petroleum products, we have propane tanks, asbestos, metals, solvents, all in the area. And so with EPA as the lead, DEQ and the contractors came in and removed all that hazardous substance first. And then the ash and debris came next. And with ODOT and DEQ and their contractors, we went through and cleaned up all the ash and debris. And we went down about 3 to 6 inches on each property. And then we tested it to make sure that the soil was clean using metals. And then the homeowners were issued certificates so that when they wanted to rebuild, that they knew that the property was clean and ready to go. We had a lot of support to do this. Senator Wyden and Merkley were very instrumental in knocking on a lot of doors, especially FEMA's, to get them to come on, hurry up, give us some money, help us out. So that was great. Kudos to USDA. They were able to bring in some more money, especially for the water district, and provided some needed TA to the water district so that they could get going again. Because, when the pipes melted and things broke, it took all hands on deck to take care of that. RST with Lincoln County came together. We met on a regular basis to coordinate the recovery and to also do some troubleshooting, whether it was because we had, a phone line where people were calling in and we didn't have anybody that spoke Spanish, things like that. It matters when you're desperate and need something. So we took care of those things. We also advocated, so for private RV parks, they didn't really qualify for FEMA because they were private. But we were able to get some stuff done because we said, well, they're right next to the river. And if we don't get this done, it's going to wash in and cause a problem. So there's things like that the state did and our partners did to make this work. Lincoln County also just received the on-site septic financial aid program funding money, and that's to help low-income people replace their failing septic systems or repair them if they got burned. So there's just a lot of good things that happened. And, I hope we don't have a disaster again, but have learned a lot on that and we'll be much more responsive next time that happens. So thank you. So the next thing I want to talk about is this brownfield grant. Allison Roberts, who was on your tour, was instrumental in getting this grant. They come out once a year. Lincoln City tried twice. So sometimes it does take a couple times to get it. It's a national competition. So kudos to the city. We really think it's great. It's worth $500,000. I know, this is great. And so you might be wondering, what the heck is a brownfield? Because it's kind of a funny term. It's a piece of property has been occupied. So it's not green space, greenfield. And usually there's something that either it is wrong, there's, a contamination issue, or it's perceived that like, oh, that was a mill, so therefore it's all contaminated. That may or may not be true, but that perception keeps it from being redeveloped. So brownfields are a very key, important piece of property within the city. And redevelopment meets the DLC goals of doing that infilling. And it's also important is because we've already spent lots of money on the infrastructure, whether that's water, wastewater, utilities, energy. So that's why it's real important to take these properties and give them a new life. So the city, what they can do with this money is they can do an inventory. So see how many sites they have in Lincoln City that are, basically not moving on into their next life and next redevelopment. They can characterize things, they can assess things. They can do some cleanup planning. Now, this is assessment, so it's not where they can actually clean up things. That could come later. And there's a huge community outreach involvement, which is really important to EPA and to the state to include the people that these properties affect, to get their input and to see what they would like. If possible, can we bring a park? Can we help, team up with them? So that's an important piece of this grant. We also have to coordinate with the State Historical Preservation Office in case these are, old buildings that we need to, maintain. Of course, endangered species are important to make sure that we're protecting them. And then, of course, the tribal consultation. So that's all part of a federal grant that you have to do those things. So how do you do that? A phase one is the first step. That's where you take a look to see, is there any problem out there? And you look for obviously drums and staining and pipes sticking out of the ground, maybe things flaking off the building, things like that. You do a visual inspection. You talk to the owners, the previous owners, if you can get a hold of them. You look at old databases, see if there's anything there, and then you make a findings. If the findings come back that say, hey, there's a problem, then the next step is to do the phase two, which means you collect samples to see if there is a problem or not. And the ultimate goal of all this is to give the property a clean bill of health so that, again, it can go on to its new life. Anyway, I'm very excited about this program, and I can't wait to see what Lincoln City does.
Thank you, Mary. Melissa.
Okay. Blue economy. This is a term that has been floating around the federal level and different states for a few years now. We've seen definitions come from NOAA and other states that are really trying to define what blue economy means, especially states like ours that have connections to large bodies of water and have lots of rivers and ports and whatnot. Oregon does not have a working definition of blue economy. And so I have been working for the last couple of years with partners here in Lincoln County They actually created a consortium basically of partners up and down the coast to work on what it means to be a blue economy in Oregon. So you're going to hear from Mark Farley in a moment about those efforts. But for me, I was happy to see that the legislature put some money forward in the last session for not just blue economy, but I think it was 5 or 6 different sectors that they asked Business Oregon to hire a consultant to define and give some data on some certain sectors so they understood them better. And blue economy was one of them. So we've just hired a consultant. We just had meetings with the work group recently, and hopefully Oregon will have a working definition of blue economy come early next year. And what that hopefully will do is help us leverage more funds federally, help us better define what kind of sectors exist under the blue economy umbrella, because of how we've been talking about it is that it's an umbrella, because there's biotech underneath that, there's innovation underneath that, the OSU Accelerator fits underneath that, all the work that's going on at the Innovation Hub or the Innovation Labs at Hatfield fit underneath that. But it really is important for the legislature to understand what we mean by it and how it's defined, so we can direct funds and resources towards it. And I'll let Mark jump in and talk about all the good work that he and his partners have done.
Yeah, thank you. So everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, right. So I'm Mark Farley, and I'm the Strategic Initiatives Manager at the Hatfield Marine Science Center, which is an OSU branch campus. Research is one of the subsectors that sits underneath the blue economy umbrella, which is why we've been involved in the conversation. And really my role in this effort is to convene and provide some leadership up and down the entirety of the coast, to bring all the critical partners to the table that care about this, that will benefit from it, and who need access to federal funding that without this sector being defined, we as Oregon don't have access to at the moment. So Melissa did a very nice job of describing that umbrella that we're all sitting underneath. Our friends to the north in Washington adopted their blue sector about 10 years ago, and have been incredibly successful around converting some older port properties into incubator spaces, and are really focusing on blue technology development. Now, Oregon's story is going to be different. And in fact, what we're seeing in this kind of blue sector developing space is that each state has its own sort of secret sauce and puts together a portfolio of investable materials, technologies, and industries that all really define what that state's blue economy starts to look like. So we are working with economic development districts and agencies from Astoria down to Brookings. A lot of our port managers have been involved in these conversations, workforce development, our community colleges, and then our industry partners, who really are, when you think about water dependency and some of the old stories that we used to tell. So the only thing that was water dependent was maritime, right? Well, it's gone so much bigger than that. So we care about what's happening in the ocean. Industry needs information from sensors and networks of information. Our weather, our commercial fleets, our food processors. We have aeronautic folks that are on the coast. All of these people are looking to work together and to articulate their work in a more unified way. So we're excited to be developing this. As Melissa said, the economic study is being undertaken right now, and that will begin to help us articulate what Oregon's special space is and lead to good things. So thanks.
Is he next again?
You are.
Okay. You have to hold on, Mark.
All right.
The other piece is I was asked to talk about the port activities here. So we have 3 identified ports in Lincoln County. That doesn't mean we don't have other bays and harbors such as Depot Bay and others that are here, but there are these are identified Oregon ports under the federal definition. So we have Newport, Toledo, and Alsea. The ports, I'm sure that you know this, but they are some of the strongest drivers for rural economies, right? So that they are so intricately tied. Patrick. He told you not to do that. Sorry. These ports are intricately tied to the cities that they sit in, that there's no way that a visitor to Wallport or a visitor to Newport can tell where the port starts and the city starts or stops. So it is so important that these ports and cities work together on their economic development tasks, but so often they do separately because of the way that funds are given or the way that strategic plans are written. So one thing that I can say that Business Oregon does is we work with all of the ports in the state to develop their strategic plans. And once they have their strategic plans in place, then we have a better idea of the important projects that they want to be doing. I will say that most of them have infrastructure in their plans. All the ports have failing infrastructure. The ports in Lincoln County, especially Newport, definitely has some infrastructure needs that they need to update their docks and pilings and different things. Some of that's privately owned by some of the processors, some of it's city owned, some of it's port owned. So it gets very confusing on how we look at infrastructure. Newport is also one of the last sort of working bay areas, right? That the docks, the processors are right on the boardwalk front. So it's a really interesting, great town, and the port is expanding. The port is finally being able to build a new building. They used to be in basically one of those a trailer for a really long time. I think they were basically in sort of, you know, those classrooms you had to go to in school when it was like extra classroom, the pods. But now they're building like a really nice building for themselves on this side. The Port of Newport is on both sides, north and south of the bay. So they have RV parks, they have industrial land, they have docks for commercial and recreational fishing. We're currently working with them on needed equipment because right now they're having their industrial land, which is some of the only industrial land in Newport. They're staging lumber on that land. They're always looking for opportunities. On the other side, they're thinking about how can they build a large events space that would be beneficial for the whole community and bring more dollars in for themselves as well. But they also have to deal with things like seawalls falling apart where the Rogue Brewery is. So, you know, there's always these big ideas, but then when it comes down to it, they sometimes just have to make sure that their docks are standing up and that they have enough fish cleaning spaces for recreational commercial fishers that are coming in. So there's always something new going on. The Port of Toledo also has done so many investments over the last decade into their ship repair and building space there. They are also facing infrastructure issues. They need to connect to the city wastewater system. So they're also one of the main spaces for the community college for the welding program. So so much is tied in with these ports, workforce and education and the opportunities there. Alsea is a port that is pretty much strictly recreation and tourism driven. There is a little bit of commercial that comes out of there, but if you get a chance to go to Alsea, I would say go. If you've ever been there before, it will look so different because what they were able to do during the pandemic is unbelievable. It's beautiful. They updated all of their docks. They put in new fee structures. They purchased some of the restaurants. They purchased some of the other buildings. They really were able to come out of the pandemic better than when they went in. And it is so nice to see because prior they were a port that could have failed and they were facing bankruptcy. So it's very impressive. And it's a beautiful small bay there and port there. Sure. Okay, back to you, Mark.
All right. Well, I'm back. So the Gladys Valley Marine Studies Building, the most significant investment that OSU and the state has made in the Marine Science Center since 1991. So we were facing a lot of need for expansion for a lot of our agencies and scientists and labs. But as we started looking at that need for expansion, we also were faced with the fact that we are in a significant hazard zone. So we have a hazard that is both seismic and tsunami. So we conceived essentially an engineering pilot project that address not just our own local needs for keeping our kind of our surrounding population safe and giving them a space to go to that would essentially save them from the tsunami. But we also were aware that coastal zones all over the world are struggling with how to build infrastructure that can withstand these natural hazards. So the building was essentially overbuilt to be an example project. We are, you'll notice some kind of key features of this. The large ramp allows people to get onto the roof, which is 48 feet high, putting you 20 feet over the worst case scenario tsunami wave that has historically hit the Oregon coast. The bottom story of the building is meant to be a breakaway walls, which allows the water to pass through. The foundation of the building, so we're also built on a sand spit. So as water inundates, there's a lot of scouring that can happen and actually liquefaction where the building sinks. So underneath the building is a foundation that is 100 feet into the sand and is essentially pumped concrete. And then the building is bolted to that. So it basically acts as a great big hull of a ship sitting in the sand. We have multiple ways to get to the roof. So if you are not able or you're injured in the earthquake, we have an elevator that runs in spite of kind of water inundation and that seismic activity. It's armored. So it will dump up to 300 people on the roof over a period of 15 minutes. We have armored stairwells inside, and then these two kind of houses on top of the roof keep all of our disaster cash. So we have enough supplies for 1,000 people for 24 hours. And then the roof is really set up to accommodate all of those people. So pretty remarkable building. We are seeing a lot of visitors from all over the world, architects and engineers coming in to look at this building and understand how we built it. And then what really becomes a focus curiosity is how we ran our public process to engage our stakeholders in the design of this building. So really remarkable, $62 million. 10% of the construction budget was taken up by the tsunami proof aspects of the building. So kind of a fascinating statistic there. I think that's all I have to say to you about that. I'm sure there's questions regarding this building. And you're all welcome to visit, by the way. We give lots of tours.
I just want to add on to that building you're looking at also houses the innovation lab. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Oregon State University has an accelerator program. It's called the Advantage Accelerator. And the primary place is in Corvallis, but it reaches across the state. There's also in Bend. There's also part of the accelerators in Bend. But recently, and Mark can speak to this a little bit more. Is this unmute? It says to start speaking. Okay. I don't know if people can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, good. The OSU decided that to really focus on this blue economy, really focus on the innovation and commercialization, which is basically means taking technology and turning it into some sort of commercial use, right? How do we make a market, put it into a market? How does that fit with our water dependent and our innovations on the coast? So the innovation lab inside of this building is the first step towards expanding into those markets. And it's already having an impact on local fishing innovations and opportunities for students and opportunities for researchers to be innovating and commercializing technology coming out of the university from the Hatfield site. So it's really exciting. Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa. You're doing a better job selling it than I am.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. And I just wanted to end with saying, if it wasn't for the partners here, like Mark, like Allison, like Dave Price at SBDC and Paul Skydema and Commissioner Jacobson, we wouldn't be able to do any of this work, right? I mean, I'm only one person and there's 12 of me around the state, but without the partners in the region, none of this stuff gets done. So I want to just say thanks.
Thank you.
Did we want to pause for questions before the next part, or is this?
Yeah, you bet, Chair. Hello, but we can take questions right now, or I can finish this slide in a minute.
Okay. I just didn't know if we were mentally transitioning to different topics. Yeah, we can continue. Please.
Okay, great. And I know we're up against time and I'll be brief. This is housing, and Lincoln City is a leader in housing on the coast. And I'll explain to you why. You may already know in seeing some of the fire recovery and response and the successes and the manner in which people are being able to be rehoused. This is a slide that deserves a lot more time, and I'm sure we're going to be discussing the Oregon Mass Timber Coalition for years to come. I'm in the great position of working with cities in Oregon to update their development codes to accept prefabricated structures without any additional permit requirements and a streamlined process. What we've found in auditing 5 cities' codes under the first phase of this Code Up Mass Timber project, including Lincoln City, is we have quite a bit of work to do to align definitions in zoning codes with the building code division. Through the Regional Solutions Program, I've already engaged Administrator Cox with building codes, and we will, as we enter into the second phase of this Code Up Mass Timber housing project, continue to work with building codes to ensure that we have a concise set of definitions and protocols for prefabricated structures or modular dwellings. Quick look at the coalition members here. And just a brief look at a couple of the factory products. This concludes the Regional Solutions presentation. Thank you for allowing us to get through. I know we're just a bit over time. We would enjoy your questions. Thank you.
I figured we could talk about mass timber for an hour. So I was like, let's just pause right there. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And I think I was writing down the general topics: wildfire cleanup, infrastructure, blue economy, tsunami resilience, and then mass timber. And I wanted to see if any of the commissioners had any questions on any of the above. Commissioner Warren.
Any idea how long it'll be till we see mass timber projects roll out in Lincoln City?
Yeah, Chair Halova, Commissioner Warren. I believe, well, we already have companies in Oregon that are producing mass timber. Cut My Timber is one, and we met with that stakeholder a couple of weeks ago to discuss their plans on expanding into Clackamas County. They have a 75,000 square foot manufacturing facility under construction now. But from the coalition's perspective, this second phase will enable the state, the Port of Portland, who's the leader providing the land for the prospective manufacturing facility. It's a couple years. It'll take a couple years. As my responsibility, the department's fairly small role in this larger project is to make sure the codes are aligned. I know I have a couple years to get this work done with up to 30 communities. We're looking at doing 30 code audits and updates with cities. So I know that there's additional funding that has to be sought and obtained. And so I would generously say in a 2 to 5 year window.
My question had to do with the infrastructure. I think we heard today on the tour and in the presentation, a lot of these dollars that have come in as a result of tragedies, unfortunately, that then can help, it seems, infrastructure situations that might have been there prior. So I wondered if and infrastructure plays into the ability to make development ready lots also for housing, not just economic development. So I was wondering if any of you had any thoughts about kind of this proactive versus reactiveness to infrastructure, which seems to affect, economic development. Also.
You bet, Chair Halova. I'd like to take a shot at that, then I'm happy to let my partners give a perspective.
It's like a national question.
Mass timber was going to be a long conversation.
Yeah. No, I was just curious, like if you see opportunities. I know it's sort of our
I want
world a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, I think Melissa from Business Oregon and Mary might be able to speak to infrastructure. I will share with you a conversation I had with Kim Travis with the Oregon Housing Community Services. Shovel-ready residential lands, certifying local governments, the code streamlining project. We're figuring out ways where we can align cities, counties to sort of walk the talk. Like we talk a lot about streamlining, we talk a lot about expediting permits, but let's see this on the ground. And we have for a couple of years tossed around the idea at Regional Solutions about shovel-ready residential lands. And that's how one potential innovative way of framing readying lands, not just for employment purposes, which we do a fairly good job of, but on the residential side. I'd like my partners or maybe even Nate to respond.
Sure.
Would
You
you-
can say something if you want to. So Business Oregon doesn't have we don't have a real role to play in housing other than the fact that I would say, other than the fact that we do have infrastructure programs. So the municipal infrastructure programs that we have currently for water and wastewater transportation type things, mainly it's water and wastewater. It is usually geared towards existing needs. So to your point of reactive. So a lot of times the programs we have are built and written to be waiting until there's a problem or waiting until, so being proactive in these situations isn't extremely easy with the programs that we have and the monies that we have existing. I do think that I think that having the fires and the pandemic all happen at the same time really shone a light on a lot of things for the state. Some of it was equity issues. Some of that was housing issues. But housing is such a giant conversation that it's almost, it's hard to know where to start because you have different levels. So, you have a houseless, homeless problem. That's a different conversation. You have emergency housing when emergency happens, and then you have affordable housing, workforce housing, these types of things. And that's not even usually the conversation that's happening when we're talking about just housing. So from Business Oregon's perspective, I think that, we currently have to work within the parameters of the programs that we have. And those programs right now are responding to failing systems, old systems, keeping the systems up to date so they're not out of compliance, so that the current residents have clean water, have access to flushing toilets, these types of things. But when it comes to new developments, projected growth, the needs, it gets a little harder. Mary? Yeah.
Yes, it is an opportunity to look at our infrastructure. So many cities don't have enough money, and so they let things go. And so when you have a natural disaster like this, it is the opportunity to say, how can we do it better? But I would say it's the cost. Where can we get the money? What's nice is the federal government is going to give the Safe Drinking Water Program, which Business Oregon runs, and then the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, which DEQ runs on the wastewater side. We're going to get 20 million for the next 5 years, roughly, and 49% of that 20 million will go out as grants. So anytime we can help with grants, we can keep those rates down, because that's really key, especially for our low income folks or people on fixed incomes. If you start raising rates because you have to pay for maintenance and stuff, how can they afford it? So it's very challenging, this whole infrastructure. The other thing is, with a disaster, you have an opportunity, there is a rule that allows people to provide drinking water outside an urban growth boundary. Well, that's great until we get too much density, and then we have septic system issues, right? They fail, they don't maintain. Devil's Lake is being impacted right now. They're beautiful homes, but look how close they are to the river or to the lake, and there's not enough space for that. So where we can also have that wastewater component with the water component is going to be key. And the disasters are going to allow us the opportunity to maybe get people off of septic systems and maybe add a bigger community system for them. Because if we can consolidate, usually we can do a better job cleaning up the wastewater and less pollution going into our lakes and rivers. So yes, there's a big opportunity, but it's that financial piece that we have to focus on. And I hope the state keeps investing, especially when you think about when properties are burnt. It may take 5-10 years. So how do we support that community while they're coming back? Because it just takes a long time. So I think that's the key, where if Oregon can keep supporting these communities for several more years so that they don't financially burden as they come back.
I know we're at time, but I didn't know if I had one more last question. Commissioner Sandoval.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, with Mary, I had a question about brownfield redevelopment and potential for building affordable housing brown. So can you talk a little bit about the funding aspects of it, or do you see like opportunities there around affordable housing and brownfield redevelopment? And if you could just talk a little bit about where the funding for that could potentially come from, where it comes from, or could it potentially come from?
Sure. So with brownfields, usually there's the perception problem or there may be physical contamination. So the main thing we have to do initially is to make sure it's going to be safe for a residential use. If the brownfield was an industrial use, we have a different standard for cleanup, and that's based on exposure. That's the only difference. So first we have to make sure it's going to be safe. Now you can build in things like you can put a vapor barrier to prevent vapors coming into a building. So we know we have the technology, we know how to make it safe for people. So that's important. We want to make sure that perception that this is going to be a safe place for people to live. So the brownfield funding, and that's again, just for the making sure the contamination is dealt with, but the actual money for like putting the housing project there, I do work with Oregon Housing and Community Services to help them understand, like, is that property safe so that they're willing to invest in that. So that's the piece I play. Again, I think we need so much more money coming into the housing arena. And brownfields are an excellent place to put them once we know it's safe for people there, or we can mitigate the issue and when we build. So.
Add one thing, since we're sitting on the coast, to address your question, and I really want to talk about infrastructure more, but I'm not going to, Director Bateman or Chair Holova, because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. It's fun, but on the brownfields thing, it would be really interesting for you all to hear of what's going on in Tillamook County. They actually hired a guy I knew in grad school who did his dissertation on brownfields as their housing coordinator. And they have one of the grants that Mary was talking about earlier, that they focused on housing and are really using that to do some of the work there. And it's a tool that Mary talked about is one of my favorite tools. It's super flexible. And up in the North Central region, like, we've used it to help people draw floor plans for housing and think about creative upstairs reuse. So there's a huge opportunity here. And I'm forgetting the guy's last name. It's Thomas. He's the housing coordinator in Tillamook County. And I was talking with him at the AOC conference, and it's really interesting work they're doing there. And I think there's probably some lessons to learn about how we can use that brownfields tool for housing. It's a tool that was designed for other things, I think, if I'm not speaking out of school, in the sense that it was designed maybe more for like industrial or commercial, but I think people are figuring out how to use it. I'll also just say, but Commissioner Jacobson is probably the one who can talk most about infrastructure after housing in this room, so, or infrastructure after disasters in this room. So
Thank you, Nate.
We really want one more question? Yes, Commissioner Boyer. 2:15 technically, but you need one more. We can do one more. We're here. Okay. So we want to thank you, everyone who's on the panel, and to Patrick for being with us here today. We are going to take a 15-minute break to prepare for this roundtable discussion, which will begin at 2:40. But I think in the meantime, there might be people that want to ask questions. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll hang out.
Oh, no, you don't have to stay at this table. We can mill around.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fail and
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking we would take a break and people may grab you and ask you a question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. We're about to rejoin the meeting in 1 minute.
I think I have to wait till it's recording part. Welcome back to the commission hearing after the break. I was just going to read a little bit about the agenda item we're about to go into, which is agenda item number 14, roundtable. So the roundtable discussion is an opportunity for the commission to hear directly from area community leaders and local officials on issues of importance to the region. On the cusp of the 50th year anniversary of the land use planning program, commissioners would like to hear leaders' views on successes and challenges to recognize for the next 50 years. And I think Brett is going to introduce everybody who's here on the panel, or they will introduce themselves. It's like a pop quiz. Yeah. Yeah, go down the line. We could start, and you have to take this and really, really close to your mouth so we can hear.
I'm Catherine Gunther. I'm the planner for the city of Yachts. Yeah, nice to meet you.
Gotta come to a meeting like this, right? We talked on the beach. I had no idea I was talking to the planner for the city. Well, there's been a lot of turnover there, right? Anno Husing, Lincoln County Planning Department.
Derek Tokos, I'm the City of Newport's Community Development Director.
Anne Marie Skinner, the City of Lincoln City Planning and Community Development Director. Susan Waukee, Mayor of Lincoln City.
Daphne LaGarza, City Manager, Lincoln City.
Allison Robertson, Economic Development and Urban Renewal Director, Lincoln City.
Kit Fox, the city planner for the city of Depot Bay.
Margaret Corby, I feel a little out of place. I'm not from the northern coast here. I am a consultant. I work for tribal governments in the Southern Oregon coast, specifically the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians.
I think with that, I think it's open. I see some writing that's going to come in on these cards about, yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of back to what I had said before. We're here to learn and to hear from all of you. We heard a lot during the tour, I think, which was very informational, especially when you see in real life issues in our case of the seawall issues. I mean, the coastal issues, the affordable housing, and opportunities, I would say. I think some very positive things we heard there. But it'd be great if you could talk. We want to hear both, I guess, the successes of the land use system and then the challenges as we move into this next 50 years. And we're recording all of this. I don't know if you wanted to say anything, Director Bateman, about our plans for all of this kind of information besides actually learning and responding accordingly.
No, thank you. Thank you, Chair. We had a similar discussion when we were in John Day with the commission just a couple of months ago. And so we've been having some of these discussions and asking the same questions. And I think what we're learning is there's certainly some common themes that run through the things that cities and counties are having to grapple with, but there are also some very unique circumstances. And so it's just interesting to see the ties that bind us and the things that make us unique. So we're here to learn. We can't wait to hear your stories.
So I don't know what the best process is. Do we go down a line? Just talk when you feel free? Okay. Yeah. Not to put you on the spot.
So at the last meeting, this is John Day, we captured your thoughts on paper. So you're gonna see us up here scribbling. And one of the things that we've also got up there are opportunities, so challenges suggest, past and dealing with, and then the opportunities, looking forward are probably based off one of these two. And then we've got a little category down here called the estuary, which some people call the parking lot. We're calling it estuary. So see where we're gonna put things. We're not really sure about where to go, but we don't want to lose them because they're important to you. And we want to make sure we honor that. And I think at the last meeting, we really started with. We just sort of started. We intended to kind of do it in order, and that's never how it works, right? Because once you start talking, everything sort of leads into one another. So I think the best way to do this is really for the bravest person who wants to make sure that they're not at last going, well, everybody said what I already wanted to say. That you jump right out there, and that'll get the ball rolling. And we'll be up there busily scribing, and you practice if we're wrong. And with us today, we have Clay, who is your South Coast representative, so some of you know her, and Brett, who's your North Coast representative. So. And I think we're really good to go. So I'm also big on the Socratic method. So like I'm opposed to just whoever's not making eye contact with me talking to each other. There's that too. I know a lot of you, and I have never use the word shy before, so I just suggest get her started. This is your audience, this is your chance, so let's get her going. And this is going to help feed into the 50th year conversation, our strategic plan in some way in terms of sort of that context. So keep those things in mind when you're talking about it. But there's a lot of great successes I know sitting at this table. No challenges because land use is perfect. Opportunities galore. So I think we're good.
I would actually like to mention a challenge. During the tour, Allison and I spoke at length about our successes with some affordable housing and the ordinance changes that I've made, that the city has made to remove impediments to housing and development. But one of the challenges that we are now facing, the bulk of our undeveloped residential land, both single family and multifamily, doesn't have sewer and water services available to it. And that is a huge obstacle to getting that those lands developed because it's expensive. And of course, the more money it costs, the less enticing that is to developers, putting more of the burden on the city to provide those sewer and water services, and city funding, of course, is limited. So that is a huge challenge to Lincoln City, and I'm sure other cities as well, to the land that's undeveloped that we have zoned for residential, sitting there in our buildable lands inventory, giving us this nice number. Oh, look, Lincoln City has lots of undeveloped residential land. Well, most of it is constrained by either not having sewer water, or having steep slopes, or having wetlands, or being in the flood hazard area, or being in the bluff hazard erosion zone. So that nice number that looks good on paper for our buildable lands inventory isn't so nice once you start taking out, deducting all of those factors. Both. Yeah, it's both.
About that. So
Mhm.
you're talking about, did I beat you to it? I'm sorry. Oh, there we go. I think we're on. When you were talking about, water and sewer to properties, are you talking like where that's clustered, like up at the villages? Like where you don't have those coming up into a certain area, or you're talking individual properties, or like a cluster of property where you could get a lot of development in one place if you have the infrastructure?
I'm talking clusters. Yeah. So we have the villages, and then we also have large clusters of properties that are specifically, we've got a large cluster of area that's zoned R175, and large clusters of multiple unit residential zoning that don't have sewer and water.
And like, how far away are those services?
Well, I wish Stephanie was here.
Yeah.
So knows.
Basically, some of them are not that far away. So we have different areas. And what we're trying to do is establish LIDs, if you will, land improvement districts, to move forward with. But again, like Anne-Marie said, the obstacle is the funding, especially for the construction. But we're looking to capitalize on our, I think it's, it's not covenants that individuals sign. So we're calling for an LID, we're calling in
Deferred improvement agreements.
the deferred improvement agreements, and that helps. But again, there's still a shortfall in funding. So we're kind of starting to group our LIDs. As a matter of fact, we met in a work session with the council to talk to them about an LID we wanted to move forward with, to start to kind of free up, at least get everything, I don't want to say shovel ready, but get things ready to go so that when funding does become available, we can start moving forward on some of these. So we're prioritizing the closer in projects that are clustered that we think we can do cost effectively, if you will. That's kind of how we've started tackling it. But again, we're going to need help, especially on the funding side of things.
Yes, I feel like we should just ask, and I won't call all your names. We'll just feel free. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So just a follow-up question to drill down maybe a little bit deeper. Do you feel like you have updated sewer and water master plans to serve these planned and zoned areas where you're doing a lot of, and we've learned today about all the great work you're doing to facilitate, support, incentivize new housing. Do you have the infrastructure plans to then just implement with funding? Are you starting it really back at step one, or the infrastructure is there? It's literally just each property is unique and you need the additional funding to get the infrastructure to that property.
We're actually updating a lot of master plans, our sewer and water master plans as we speak. We're starting that process, but we have enough information. There are areas that we can move forward with even as we're updating our master plan. So we're prioritizing those areas that we're ready to start design work, if you will, and get things moving along that way.
I'll step in and sort of make an urban comment, even though I'm a county planner, that and Walport's not represented here. Do we have anybody from Walport? But when I took the job as planning director 10 years ago for Lincoln County, I remember one of the first meetings was an economic development meeting in Newport. And the city manager at the time from Walport was begging us in economic development discussions, help me. I can't we've got and Katie's aware of these properties in Walport. We've got high and dry, not steep within the city property. So no, ready to go, but they just, and he was begging us to help him understand how to get infrastructure up there. And I think that has been, and as we talk about the affordable housing and everything like that, I think that's the biggest choke point. This infrastructure is hellaciously expensive. And this conversation is at least 20 or 30 years old. Tell how old I am and been dealing with these things. But at the same time, it's like Oregon does a crappy job at this. I understand, and I am not an expert at this, but I understand from conversations gone on forever, other states have much more imaginative opportunities and ways to allow this to go forward. And, when that conversation has been going on forever, but I remember all of a sudden, then there was a report that said the costs of growth. And then, oh my God, that had a chilling effect on everything. Was like, well, we don't want to subsidize that because we don't want growth or we don't want to subsidize it. But and I've said this to Katie when we've talked about housing. It's like, until I hear the infrastructure word, I'm not going to get excited about any of this, because as a county planning director dealing with all of these homeless people and all the code violations and all this stuff, it is no fun to stare in the eyes of someone and say, you can't be here with your RV living. And they stare at you and they say, where do I go? And we don't have any answers for that. And so all of this, and I was privy to hearing a report that your housing study yesterday from one of your folks. And I think it's spot on. It's nailing that we've got to help the cities. And especially the smaller cities, right? Having staff and capacity to do all these things, it's like next to impossible. And, I'm trying to change my tone and how I deal with this and saying, instead of being critical, it's like, I want to help you guys. We do need to get substantial new resources in on this. And I recall years ago when we did the TGM program, right? And there was a generous grant program that went along with that. If we didn't have that kind of influx of resources and requirements to do these plans, that would have taken decades, but we got after it. There was an aggressive grant program, and that program had some very tough starts, but we got through it. And these transportation system plans, especially for our cities, are central to finally merging land use and planning. But we did it with resources. And there was enough resources for a consulting community to sort of grow around it to help, because it's not like you're going to do this every day. And so that's what I think we need a TGM for UGBs. I'm not sure that there's a TGM program for UGBs. And I can see the smiles. Only planners could love that kind of right.
Never do this in 45 minutes if we had to spell everything out.
Right.
Well, I can't do anything in 45 minutes, period. So yeah. With that, I think I'm going to call it quits for what I'm saying. But yeah, infrastructure. Please.
I will echo that one more time just for emphasis. So Yachats, we are small, but we've grown a lot. We had an increase in population from about 700 and change to just under 1,000. And we don't have a place to put those people. We can't hire. Some of the stores that are open sporadically have gone now to single shifts. We have a Dollar General that a lot of people didn't like in the first place, and now they don't have to worry about it because it's just not staffed anymore. And it's housing in every economic bracket. We couldn't hire a city manager because we couldn't hire anybody from out of the area. The one we got for several months was living in a hotel. And I finally came to the same conclusion that our problem is that what we have left, and our UGB is identical to our city limits, so I use them interchangeably, but what we have left to play with, the infrastructure is not there. I can't come up with a creative way to provide incentives for anybody to partner in developing it. A lot of our problems are getting water up the hill. So it's not even that far away, but our aging water storage is halfway up this hill and the rest of our city is all the way up the hill. So we're talking about some pump stations, some tanks that we just don't have the money for. And somebody else might be willing to build a road. Sewer is a little easier because we all know that just takes care of itself when you're uphill. But it's challenging. So again, we have the same situation. We have numbers that look really good on paper as far as our buildable land inventory, but we just can't capitalize on that.
And you're not from a poor community.
No.
Right, yeah.
And so I'm talking about even the rich folks can't find a place to live.
Other states have infrastructure, they don't have the issues that Oregon has for infrastructure. Can you give me an example of a state I could look at or?
Oh, was
Yeah,
that
just for
you?
me, right, yeah. You know, look, this is a conversation that was happening in earnest like 20, 25 years ago. So I don't recall exactly what state it is, but there are people that do that for a living. And that information should be readily available. But Oregon has this unfortunate tendency of thinking we're the leaders, right? We turn to other states and figure out how to, no, they turn to us and figure out how to do things, right? They're sort of in our DNA to think that we've got it figured out. And in this case, we don't. And it is probably one of the reasons we're facing, some of us are really concerned about this upcoming session and what might happen to the land use system is that it's been so long, we've become detached from understanding. You have to be a county planning director to know what would happen to this place if we didn't have land use planning. But the only way you can't keep that pot on the lid and turn up the fire underneath it without an explosion unless we have a way to have orderly annexation. And so that we still, the fundamental principles of Oregon land use are sound. We just have to couple it now with urban growth boundary amendments, help the cities do this, come in with some resources. And I think that's the way to let the pressure off and start to address these needs. We need to be able to have cities, for instance, identify, and this is no fun to do this, RV parks that we can have some of these people go to that are not managed by felons and with substandard water systems that in our county were fish camps done 50, 60 years ago and have now become de facto affordable housing with people living in RVs with substandard water and everything like that. But we need to be able to be thoughtful about this and grasp the nettle on finding places in our community. We run infrastructure to it and we have places that people can go. Because it's one thing to stare at someone who's been a criminal and are living in an RV and they've been terrorizing the neighborhood and cracking down on them. But when you see really like good, honest people that are just don't have the resources looking at you like, what am I going to do? And it's just, it's haunting. And so we got to get on this. And this is not a new thing. So I'm sorry, I don't have a more specific, go to California. I think there's a host of places, but we need to challenge, folks that information's out there. It's not hidden somewhere. We're not going to have to ferret it out. We just need to have the open-mindedness in Oregon to say we're going to get on top of that.
And that because infrastructure, like I'm from the development point of view where it's just like, we have to do it. So that's how I know Oregon, or not. Right. And so that's one of the reasons I asked the regional solutions folks, because I was thinking, I don't know personally, and I don't know if any of you know, or anybody know, what are the alternatives to infrastructure funding and planning? I have not heard anything yet. But I agree. The information's out there. I'm sort of searching. I will be searching for who at the state level wants to take. Yeah, you had a comment.
I'll give you a specific example with respect to local improvement districts, just real quick. Local improvement districts, it's where, a number of neighbors are coming together. For example, they've got a substandard street. They would like to pave that street, maybe put sidewalks in, deal with a stormwater issue, something of that nature. In the state of Oregon, if you do a local improvement district, you go through your engineering report, you identify and apportion out the costs, you do your project. those benefiting parties have to pay the assessment at the end of the project, or the local government has to carry that, say, over a 10-year period. There are a number of states out there that allow that assessment to go onto the tax bills, be paid out over a long and be paid out over a longer period of time. So there are other mechanisms. I think Michigan was an example in that one where you can create a framework where a local improvement district's more attractive to actually, moving forward with. We only do them in very limited, circumstances, typically a handful of people trying to get sewer service. And because any kind of large scale local improvement district, given the statutory structure in Oregon, is just a nightmare for us. I want to go with successes before I hit challenges real quick. We have had more multifamily development in Newport in the last few years than we have in over a decade. We have in 2020, 110 unit, affordable, 60% median area income, affordable, multifamily project go online. Oregon Housing Community Services was a major player there. We provided a property tax abatement over a 10-year period. That's 1.6 million. Thank you, Lincoln County. You participate in that. That part of that tax abatement hits the county, not just the city, all of the taxing entities. But that helped. Okay. But that project wouldn't have penciled out if not for that. That allowed the developer to finance their development fee. It was a private development at the end of the day. But that was 85% of the funding on that project was public. It takes an incredible amount of subsidy to make these, as you guys know, to make these types of projects happen. And we don't expect that we're going to see another one with Oregon Housing Community Services funding for a few years, because they've got to spread that around the state. There are a lot of communities in need. We know we're not the only one. We also have a private development, another 66 units that was completed in 21, another 78 units under construction right now, another dozen in Nye Beach. We play our role in this, into the 66 unit one. We allow for system development charge credits to be transferred in circumstances where a developer does a qualified public improvement, because under state law, if you're doing a qualified public improvement, you get an SDC credit. You have to use it in 10 years. If you're in Newport, you're not adding enough housing units to use it up in 10 years. So what we do is we make it available for transfer as long as it's not offsetting more than half of the assessment that would otherwise be due. What's that mean on the ground? That was $100,000 to that developer. Now, he paid some to the person who was transferring it, but they were coming up against the clock, so they got a pretty good deal. Those are small things we can do to help move the dial. We struggle. In Newport, our median home sale price now is over $400,000. It was $200,000 less 5 years ago. So we can adjust our system development charge methodology, go to a price per square foot assessment, make it cheaper for smaller homes, but we're on the margins in terms of what we're involved with. I mean, when we're adjusting our zoning code, and we don't have a lot of barriers there, and we continue to tweak and adjust that. But our single biggest issues are lack of available developable land, infrastructure, and labor and materials costs because of where we're located. We have a small contracting community. Most of the builders have to come in from the valley. All the materials are getting shipped in, equipment for construction, all of that drives up costs. And, we're fairly well along in an update to our housing. They call it capacity analysis. There used to be housing needs assessment. One of the tweaks we did to that is we're doing a constructability assessment as part of that. It's not required under the state law, but we took a look at, okay, here's what our need is projected forward. Here's what our buildable lands are theoretically within our urban growth boundary and city limits. Okay, what's within our urban growth boundary that's theoretically buildable? How much of it would we expect residential development to actually happen on if it could be served? And so we took 9 sub areas. We have current facility plans, to your question earlier. We fed into that what the infrastructure costs are to serve those 9 sub areas. We had our consultant vet half a dozen different housing products against that after interviewing a whole bunch of developers to say, okay, what kind of price points would you need to market these to be able to do this work, and look at the residual value. And the residual value being, okay, after we build this product, after we put in all this infrastructure, is there going to be enough land left for a profit and to buy the property? 6 of the 9 sub areas don't pencil out, not even close. And it's largely because of water and wastewater infrastructure. A new lift station, wastewater lift station to serve one of those areas is $2.5 to $3 million. Water pump stations, $750,000 to $1 million. I mean, our terrain's up and down, and we just don't have a lot of flat land. And so even when you're putting your streets in, you're looking at retaining walls, which are pretty expensive. So it's a real challenge for us. And so I would echo what Lincoln City's saying. Additional funding on the infrastructure side is key if we're going to see some of these additional properties actually be developed with housing.
So from a land use perspective, though, what could we be doing on our end that you would think would help with those challenges specifically? So is this more of a DEQ issue, a business Oregon issue, whoever else isn't in the room, their issue?
I think I will say, and it's not a small thing, and it's a controversial thing though, is I do appreciate pushing the dial on off-street parking. We have the projects in Nye Beach actually materialize because that's an area in the city of Newport where the developer could take on-street parking and use that as a credit to what they would otherwise have to construct as off-street parking. That reduced the price per square foot on those units that they're making available as rentals considerably. It's not without controversy, as you know, and we know. Having a tough time selling that elsewhere in the city, but I think there are also trade-offs. I mean, that works where we have fully developed street right-of-ways. Where we have narrower streets and don't have the capacity for on-street parking, then we really need the off-street parking. And we have reduced just recently when we adopted our transportation system plan earlier this year, put in place fairly narrow street standards for our infill areas, because what we're finding is infill development has a hard time. You're talking about a handful of lots. They don't have a lot of capacity to pay for much in the way of infrastructure. So for low volume streets where you're under 500 ADT, we allow a 16-foot wide paved section with 4-foot shoulders. Shared use, because it's a low volume street. If you're walking, if you're cycling, it's all expected to happen within the same shared area. But in that circumstance, we may not have the available on-street parking for that type of trade-off. But I do appreciate the work that's been done to try to really push don't overpark, because it has a very meaningful impact on whether or not you can get housing built.
I really appreciated what you said, at least from my perspective, on talking to the development community and seeing, hey, just the interaction between the private and the public sector, I think is so important to make sure that, we don't think of things that, fall on deaf ears type of thing. So, yeah, that was really good for me to hear that.
I think from the land use perspective, and going back to something that Ano said about annexation and land use planning laws in Oregon, there can be expanding the UGB can be a rather daunting process, and perhaps DLCD or the state needs to look at some different factors in buildable lands inventory. For instance, what Derek's doing with constructability, because you have to be able to show when you want to request the UGB expansion and to annex property, it's got to be in the UGB. And so if you're running low on inventory of lands that are not buildable, but on paper they're showing as buildable, we need more factors to be able to say, no, this really is not buildable, so that we can then go out and get that UGB expansion and get more buildable lands. Does that make sense? Kind of in a roundabout way.
Can I quickly jump? I just want, because thank you for that. And I was giving a presentation in front of you guys in a Zoom meeting on this very, very subject. And Jim Rue it was one of his last meetings. And I said to you guys back, because this completely aligns with this, but I said, I asked Matt Spangler, one of our legendary former planning directors, you work for DLCD, so a top-notch mind, right, Nick, in land use planning. And I said, Matt, what's the unfinished business of Oregon land use? And he thought for a minute and he goes, I think it's the urbanization piece. And then when I was before you with Jim Rue, and I challenged Jim in a nice way, and I said, Jim, I talked with Matt Spangler, and he said the urbanization piece is maybe the unfinished business. And he made a great set of remarks. He goes, and it's about these UGBs and being able to do them better and quicker. And he actually rattled off some statistics about actually how many UGBs have. His perspective was, no, we're okay. We've had a lot of UGBs that have been amended and changed. And I was relieved to hear that well, maybe it isn't structurally, we need to change the OARs to make that different. And maybe it is more of a resource issue, but obviously you're putting some fingers on both of you, and you're the urban folks, you're the ones that are going to understand this so much better. No one can get infrastructure on the ground like Derek here. When we did the NOAA facility and everything like that. I mean, he's a wizard when it comes to jockeying all that stuff to get that infrastructure on the ground. So this is exactly the kind of person you want to have these conversations with, because he's lived it, coupled with best practices from other states. But just I want to amplify it and just sort of build upon your remark about is our UGB process either broken or can be improved? Is it okay? Do we just need to adequately invest in it? Those are the kinds of questions we need to be asking.
Well, and it is weird that you can subtract steep slopes from the buildable inventory, but not these places that have much more challenging constraints to development. We have people building on steep slopes all the time. In fact, when we just finished our HNA, I kind of said, gee, this whole shaded area that you have ruled out because of the steep slopes, I'm counting rooftops, the number of homes already constructed there. So people don't see that as a challenge. But if they have to cut the road in and pump their own water to the top of the hill, that's a development constraint. So that's what we're left with, are the ones that nobody wants to touch.
So I'm hearing, there's a lack of capacity and lack of resources in most of the communities, which is not uncommon right now anywhere, but I think it's especially true for smaller communities. I'm also hearing this lack of buildable land. And so I think what I'd like to know from you all is, if you were to be able to expand UGB in an easier way, or just be able to expand it, what is the benefit you think you will be receiving? Is it, are you looking at increased property taxes? Are you looking at just more homes? What is the outcome you're hoping that the expansion will produce for you?
And can I have a very similar thought? Thanks for that, Commissioner Warren. To add to that, in a similar benefit, does it answer the infrastructure issue that you're addressing, right? So even if you could expand the UGB, don't you still have the infrastructure problem? And I'm going to answer it myself also. Maybe it makes it less expensive, right? If you can do it in a different area, right? Is that the answer? So go ahead and answer, Commissioner Warren.
Okay. I would say in most circumstances, it's not advantageous for us in the city of Newport to expand our UGB because we're dealing with steep terrain, and the further out we go, we're just dealing with more steep terrain, even further away from infrastructure. That said, there are targeted properties where it actually is. They're few and far between. We have one where we're dealing with right now. I'm not going to delve into it in detail, but it is proximate to services that are just inside the city. And it happens to be in a location where we've upsized our, in this case, waste. We have to daisy chain our wastewater lift stations because of just how we're situated. And we upsized all those lift stations largely to deal with wastewater overflows that were happening during severe storm events. So we actually have the infrastructure in place to serve it. So in those unique circumstances where hey, this clearly is a piece of property that we could readily serve, probably better than we can a number of the properties we already have inside our urban growth boundary. There should be a way for us to really dial in on that infrastructure piece. What does it get us? In this case, it probably will get us housing that's probably a little bit more affordable for our workforce. It doesn't have ocean views. It's not in an area where you're going to have that higher end housing. That's what it would probably get us.
During this meeting, we heard about some work in the department about the ability within the UGB to kind of take lands out and, add new lands and kind of swap for kind of a net. Yeah, I don't know if Gordon, you wanted to say anything about that. I feel like it's sort of.
And while he's doing that, and because Derek and I are involved in a very promising opportunity, and I don't want to start saying that the land use is a problem here, but we're having trouble squaring that swap up of being it right, because we have this piece of property that is more or less exactly the kind of thing we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to do the swap, but the rules are inhibiting us from doing it because and you guys can, I'm forgetting exactly what all the details are because it's kind of, but you got multiple players but you got to make this happen over here. And whether or not, that other individual is going to want to play ball on that. So, but I think he's onto something here in terms of that's a pretty readily available example of something. If we could snap our fingers, would certainly not blow apart Oregon's land use system and may fall into a small category of at least a case study for our urbanization expert here to look at and say, is this really the way we're doing this in this particular case really make a lot of sense because we do have this real opportunity.
Yeah, and just to put some context to the piece we're talking about, it's about 40 acres in size. We'd be looking at a little over 200 units.
Yes, we're working with local governments on these exchanges of land. I think Derek is doing the research to show that there are lands inside urban growth boundaries, not just in Newport and cities all throughout Oregon, that are difficult or impossible to provide public facilities for. And there's two aspects to this. First of all, our rules about what is called buildable lands that can be counted towards a 20-year supply does say that buildable lands don't include lands that cannot be provided with public services. So I think Derek is doing the research to get into that and the findings to show what lands are physically or just financially infeasible to provide services to under current conditions. And then I think that we could, and I think that's one of the areas where with our Oregon Housing Needs Assessment program that we've done some analysis is that we can make the rules regarding these exchanges a lot easier in a way. And that's by clearing up some of the questions. I think there's been some questions raised in the Newport case of are the lands that would be taken out of the UGB actually buildable by definition, and what happens to them? They're supposed to get rural zoning now. There's all sorts of issues potentially with Measure 49 and property rights. And so we're going to look at those rules, I think, as part of assuming the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis gets forwarded by the legislature to try to resolve and make it so that these kind of situations can go forward, because I'm sure there are many circumstances throughout the state where a city could add land to its UGB that's more easily developable in return for removing land from the existing UGB that, as Derek's research is showing, is not developable under current conditions with public facilities or because of steep slopes, or although they're not, as you pointed out from Yahat, steep slopes are not always an impediment if there's a nice view at the top, I guess.
And there is in Yahat.
Thank you. Think that this makes a robust, this helps us from our point of view.
Real world example, just to, because I think that's a great one. So, because I think we need to be very careful if we're going to start monkeying with this, extremely careful. And it really needs to be grounded in real world examples of stuff that we could almost all agree. If we have a little bit lighter here, that we'd probably get a lot farther.
Yep. Agreed. Definitely for the commissioners to go on, but I wanted to make sure to get comments from this side of the table. So I don't know if okay. Yes.
Actually, I want to hear from Margaret. Yeah, a little bit about the Native American communities that you work with and nations that you work with. Are there similar, are they concerned about similar issues in terms of housing affordability and infrastructure? Or are there different, are there other issues that are?
Okay, so I'm just gonna lay out some of my experience. I think tribes are adjacent to cities in the state of Oregon, right? A lot on the reservations because they're individual nations, right, existing within the state itself. And so they share boundaries. We also have tribes that, do work in the state to steward their resources that they lost over time when they were removed or terminated, or, really the horrific history of tribes in Oregon that occurred. And so, and I also am just a coastal resident. And so I think I have a lot to think about. And what I've heard, and I went to the most recent planners meeting. So I'll get to this question that you had in a minute, but I just wanted to just acknowledge the amount of work that planners have to do. It's a heavy load. And I think we're all kind of in that pinch too. Tribes are in that pinch as well. Like the government's capacity is limited. And our interactions with local governments are really critical to protecting resources like together. And I think we see definitely similar problems with housing. I mean, it's ubiquitous on the coast that there are housing issues. Every city has problems retaining staff. So all of the coastal communities that have, staff, they have staff turnover. The tribes have a lot of staff turnover. And then, they have housing problems for their employees in these areas. So I'm sure, I don't, Celeste isn't here today, but, like they're in Lincoln City. I'm sure that their casino is staffed by quite a few people. And I would guess, and I just don't want to speak on their behalf, but that they're experiencing issues with keeping staff and retaining staff because there's just nowhere to stay. So, I love to just back up just a little bit further because I think, there are so many challenges Oregon is facing, with rising sea levels, potential tsunamis. We have lots of housing crises going on pretty much everywhere in the state. And then we're trying to hold up an economy and make sure we don't all lose our places to live, right? And have food on the table. So I just wanted to share that I think that some of those challenges, some of the statewide planning goals, I think were set out to help us. But in some cases, they're kind of constraining us, or they potentially are not doing what they intended to do. So in either case, sometimes they're making things harder for us to move forward and do more work. And in some cases, they're not doing what they initially intended to do. And what I see is some of the statewide planning goals trickling down on the, into these planning offices, is that without relationships with tribes and without help from the state, they are, their plans are outdated, they're complex. And, we had a person today presenting, and I'm sorry, I would think it was during the Blue Economy presentation that somebody was talking about code streamlining. And I was like, this is something that we need to do because every planner is experiencing problems. And when I think about code streamlining, I think also of opportunities for the tribes to engage with local planners and find opportunities to do some of the work for cultural resource protection, and also align on things like housing or other projects that the city or county might be undertaking, right? So and just one other challenge I would say is citizen advisory components of these local comprehensive plans and how they're functioning, and if they're functioning at the level that they need to be, and if they're effective, and if they're engaging their community in a way, and it's working with the planners again. And it's can everybody come together to not make things harder, but to try to fix the problem? So I would just put relationships also as a success and then also as a challenge there. And I think that's all I can get out of my brain right now. So thanks.
Thanks. So I'll just, from Depot Bay's perspective, I mean, I think we share a lot of the same concerns that the other cities in Lincoln County are experiencing in terms of housing affordability and infrastructure issues. We have a couple of, I think, somewhat unique issues that are specific to Depot Bay. And just as, you know, I've been the city's planner there for only about 7 months now, and coming originally from California. So I'm getting used to working in Oregon and still getting kind of used to the community. But just a couple of things that I would observe that are unique issues in Depot Bay. In terms of the housing affordability, one of the things that I see is that there seems to be interest in the part of the development community in building multifamily housing in certain areas of the city, particularly in the areas that are zoned for commercial use, because we allow it as an outright use in those zones. But the challenge that I see coming from that is that inevitably those units are converted to tourist accommodations, to vacation rentals. And so they add nothing to the affordable housing stock for workforce housing for the community. And it's a challenge for Depot Bay because we have no tax base and we rely very, very heavily on the lodging tax to fund basic day-to-day operations. So there's a real balance there that we need the money from the lodging taxes that these tourist accommodations are bringing in. By the same token, we're not able to incentivize multifamily housing that's being used by long-term renters or that's being, you know, owner occupied for the most part. So that's perhaps a unique circumstance in a community of only about 1,400 population that we're dealing with. And then certainly infrastructure concerns. There's a lot of projects that the city has tried to undertake with respect to road projects. There was a project with ODOT a couple of years ago that didn't end up going through in the area south of the bridge, and that was before I came on board with the city. But I think a big issue for infrastructure, at least with Depot Bay right now, is dealing with our harbor, which is kind of one of the crown jewels of that community. It's centered around, you know, the world's smallest navigable harbor. That's on the signs as you drive over the bridge, going into the downtown, you know, commercial area. But we're really struggling with securing financing and keeping up with the increasing costs of construction and supply chain and all those issues so that we can keep our harbor functioning. The city, you know, was able to upgrade one of its docks a couple of years ago, Dock 1, but there are 3 more city-owned docks in the harbor that there's a project in the works right now to replace those as well. But the city is still well short of the funding that it needs to complete those projects and is trying to figure out ways to phase or do other things with the project so that we can keep those types of things moving forward. So again, the infrastructure and housing are definitely issues, and we do have some particular issues and twists that I've seen, at least in my short period of time in Depot Bay.
Can I ask you a question that I've never thought of before? We're always hearing about the short-term rentals in relation to, I think, you know, taking up housing. And I feel like mentally we are always thinking of it as a single family, like, oh, instead of staying in a hotel, if you come for short-term rental, you can stay in a house, right? But you saying that, you know, a multifamily building was built and then that happened made me think of it in a completely different way. I was curious about, you know, do we have a lack of hotels on the coast? You know, it's not something I really thought of until you said that.
Yeah, I mean, in Depot Bay, I don't think so necessarily. There's certainly a lot of older properties that probably could stand to be renovated, some, you know, 50s and 60s and maybe older motel properties. But then we have a huge Worldmark timeshare complex of I don't know how many hundreds of units. That's a relatively new project. So there's a lot of existing inventory of that type of use in the community. But because we don't allow the short-term accommodations in any residential zones, it's all funneled into the commercial zones. And then because we do allow the residential development in the commercial zones, that those residences then get flipped and get turned into short-term accommodations. And it's multifamily units, you know, townhomes that have gotten, that's happened well with, and that's also happened with single family homes. So I'll see a plans come across my desk. I'm looking at a set right now for ostensibly a single family home on a lot facing 101 in Depot Bay. And you look at the plans, it's obvious that it's going to be a short-term accommodation, 4 bedrooms, each with an ensuite bath and top floor living area, all open concept. So, you know, ostensibly that's, you know, a nice big multi-family or, you know, possibly a multi-generational house with all those bedrooms and everything, but I know that's not what it's going to be used for. So, and it's difficult to find a way to, there's land available in other areas of the city that is zoned for higher density development, but again, because of issues like slope and somebody access to infrastructure, those aren't as attractive to the development community at the moment. It's easier to build along 101 in the area that's accessible and has all the infrastructure in place.
Haven't you seen the commercials? The big tagline is you get to be, it's when you go on vacation, you get the whole house with your people. That's the deal. And especially the more people you got, then it becomes very affordable. It's competitive with a normal hotel room. And people like that. When the recession happened, that was like one of the only things that was still moving in our department. When I first came on board, we were still in the depths of the recession. The only 2 things that were moving were the vacation rental market and banks that suddenly had, because they made bad loans, had properties that had code violations that needed to be remedied. I was like, those were our 2 income streams at the, you know, that seems like a million years ago, but.
I didn't know if we had any for those. Looking at that middle zone. If you had any more.
I was just gonna comment that I don't think short-term rentals made it on the challenges, and we've heard about that several times today. What is it?
That's the rental tax.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about the tax. I was just thinking more about the STRs as a whole. Yeah.
I would add for us, because in Newport, we have a pretty strict license cap on short-term rentals and where they can go, and even requiring that they be dispersed in certain areas. It requires a lot of resources for us to stay on top of that, but we do. What we can't control are seasonal homes. They're not short-term rentals. They're just second homes. And we have a large number of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, our HNA, we came in at 65% vacancy in Yachats.
Sure. You drove past the Salishan Spit for years. In the winter, it's like black out there. There's, you know, those are second and third and fourth homes.
We had the same issue too, and you weren't on the tour earlier, but I'd mentioned that I'm working on revising our STR code, and but the one thing that we don't have any control over are the second homes.
Tillamook County, same thing. I remember this even from years ago. The statistics there were eye-popping. How much of the housing stock were second homes?
Yeah.
I'll phrase this. So I hear about, I'm hearing y'all say about the expense of getting infrastructure to these sites. Besides cost, why is nobody going up in building? Like going up floors?
Yeah, zoning codes have height restrictions.
Right.
And
So
those
single family homes, aren't there 2 and 3? You can do 2 and 3 levels.
You can go up to 35 feet
35 feet.
in Lincoln City in the R1 zones.
I don't hear a lot of people saying, let's go up. Let's just do single family homes. So I'm just curious, and I'm not a builder, so I'm a
saying that
natural resource nerd.
in the multifamily
I
housing?
I just don't understand why people aren't going up.
We also have a kind of older demographic. So I hear that from a lot of people that they want single level. You know, they're either old or they're planning to be old. I guess that's true of all of us.
I would like to add that I think it has to do with builder capacity. And I think that we're at a good place with that now, but in the past we haven't been, and also cost. Because
we've been talking about that for a long time. It's how do we really get people to want to build out the full envelope? Because they just don't want to. So.
I mean, I don't know if this is the case here, but there's different contractors for different scale of work. And from what I've heard in the past in different places is like, if you're this happens in Portland in a totally different context where it's like you're building what we would say small building, 4 stories, but it's like, okay, then you can go to Intel or Nike or the airport, right? So all those buildings are gonna be like, oh, I can go over there and maybe get prevailing wage on an affordable housing project. So it leaves a lot of the folks who have a certain density, certain scale with not a lot of workforce. So I could imagine you might have something similar in the coast where it's like, who is available to build and what's their capacity around size of building that they can build.
No,
Yeah,
that's a fair point. As soon as you get into the multifamily or mixed use, you're into commercial building codes. You have different contractors who do that work. We don't have depth of commercial contractors on the coast. Most of what we have in the contracting community, they handle single family. That's their specialty.
Yeah,
But where we do have multifamily, we're getting the full 3 floors typically. We are going to be looking to adjust our building height. That'll be a fun process for us. But because there've been some changes in the building code that make it very difficult to get 3 full floors on a 35-foot building height, depending on how you measure it. So we'll be looking at adjusting that to make sure that they can get the three floors.
And I know a contractor who is in Portland that was doing a building in Astoria, and it's not only, I mean, the company's in Portland, so then they need to house their workers somewhere. So they have the housing issue also, just to house the workers to build the housing. So it's another thing.
One of the other impediments to going up is there's an aerial fire apparatus access requirement for structures that are taller than 30 feet. And I don't know the ins and outs of the requirement, but I know that limits a number of our new building permit applications is that requirement. And it also goes to slopes because they have to have, I believe they have to have access all the way around or certain portions or something. So if you're on a site that has varying contours and you can only get access in one place and not in the 2 or 3 places that fire needs it, then your building isn't going to be taller than 30 feet or it won't meet the fire code. Then there's other options, but they get more expensive.
That might have to do with the scale of the truck, probably. I think it has something to do with depending on. Yes.
A couple of questions. I haven't heard anything about transportation, and I'm curious with the extraordinary housing need, the lack of affordable housing. I'm expecting a lot of retirees, maybe displacing people that used to work in your communities. And so are you experiencing people moving further and further away and then in turn commuting and creating additional traffic impacts in your communities? Or is that just, I'm drawing a conclusion that may not exist. I'm curious to know what.
I don't want to sound like I'm joking, but what we've seen in Yachats are those people who normally would have been living further and further away can't find anything there either. So they're literally living in their cars in many cases. So on site at the hotels that they work at, I had a conversation with the general manager at the Adobe the other day, and he estimates that almost a huge percentage of his behind the scenes people are just sleeping in the parking lot. So there's no transportation issue because they're not going anywhere.
And I had an entrepreneur in Yachats that was having a robust conversation with me about trying to convert timber conservation zoning that they happen to own
Oh, tell her I said hi.
into what triggered you? What part of that mentioned? But the robust part, but and then now I think it would be a terrible idea. Don't get me. I think goes back to the beginning of the conversation that we need to help Yachats get some infrastructure and figure this out, not start busting into our resource lands. I think that's a terrible idea. We need that orderly urbanization coupled with thoughtful stuff like Derek was pointing out about the logistics of actually being able to serve these areas, but and I realize that's a really big, and it's hard when you have someone who's so earnest and yeah, what are they doing? They're living, people are living in RVs and I think that individual too has one house that's kind of like the old company store type thing, right? Where
She moved out of her house all last summer and lived in a tent in her own backyard and let her employees have the house. So, yeah.
We have about 5,000 vehicles a day in commuting into Newport because we're a regional employment center in Lincoln County. I really can't say how many of those folks would like to live in Newport if they could find housing. My assumption is some percentage would and some percentage wouldn't. We are actively working right now, and it's a TGM funded project that we're working on. We just wrapped up our transportation system plan in what we call our city center area, which is a portion of our community where we have a lot of underdeveloped properties that are in pretty poor shape. And so we're trying to incentivize redevelopment in that area. We put an urban renewal district in place to help fund some of that in 2015. So it's got a pretty healthy increment now at this point in time. Our challenge is US 101. The tremendous volume of traffic on US 101 makes it near impossible to do any kind of mixed use development, maintaining a traffic pattern that's two-way. So we're looking at doing a couplet. We've looked at a couple different couplet options. Couplets, some people like, some people hate. So we're not done with that conversation. But what we're really trying to do is create conditions in the city center where we can widen out those sidewalks and put in bike lanes and create conditions where people would actually want to live in multifamily housing on the second and third floor, as opposed to the conditions now where they'd be so close to the tailpipes. It's just not something that's attractive.
Lincoln City's TSP talks about alternate routes to help relieve the congestion on Highway 101. And we have a 3-year-old urban renewal area that has about half of the land in city ownership due to a failed development in the north end of town. And at some point, those properties are going to be housing, and we will need a major road to connect to Highway 101 through that development site. So I think, where we can get the topography situated and the cost, it's going to be a pretty heavy lift in that part of town. So it won't be a lot of little streets. It'll be one big street that we will need. And then we're also looking to start a draft urban renewal plan in another area of town. And that also, it has mostly one road in and out. So really, couple things keep me up at night, but one of them is circulation and options for alternate routes for people to get in and out safely.
Which was a terrible problem when with the evacuation of the fires in 2020.
And we do have, as Allison said, we do have in our transportation system plan for that other area of town. We do have a connection proposed. It's a matter of funds and annexation and acquiring the property, because most of it is private property. So
the other thing that keeps me up at night is pretty controversial issue is any kind of housing in low elevation. And that I know is a tricky subject, and Anne Marie and I speak about it often as different developments come online or are brainstorming about how to get to development. And every time there's something that happens with housing in a low elevation area, my heart breaks. Because I think that we are doing new construction that will put people there for a long time, and none of us know what is ahead other than statistics and probability of sea level rise and climate change and all those things. So,
and I think it was when Margaret was speaking, and the thought entered my head about the statewide planning goals, and they can kind of contradict each other. For instance, we have statewide planning goal for housing, provide housing for all the citizens of the state. But then we've also got the planning goals for hazard areas and coastal areas, and you really shouldn't have housing in those areas. So you've got the one goal that says provide housing. You've got the other goal that says, well, it really shouldn't be here. And as I'm working on the comprehensive plan update, some of the public feedback, feedback that I received in the public input directly pertains to the tsunami inundation zones. And there's a segment of people in Lincoln City who don't want any residential zoning in the tsunami inundation zone. Well, the entire west side of Highway 101 of Lincoln City is in the tsunami inundation zone. So if we put that into practice, thereby complying with one of the statewide planning goals, we're going to be in opposition with the other statewide planning goal of housing, and we're going to wipe out half the housing zoning in Lincoln City. So granted, there needs to be a balance, but those are just some of the not inconsistent, maybe inconsistencies with the statewide planning goals, and and trying to get that all to mesh when we're updating comprehensive plans and contemplating zone changes and comprehensive plan map changes.
Shall I jump in here, Chair, since I know we're at time, but I wanted to thank everybody for their very careful and considered comments. And I'm gonna channel Gordon here, who likes to talk about taking all of those goals together, and that they're to be taken as a bundle. And I know oftentimes it's to force the conversation about trade-offs, and so that the community has a conversation about, all right, what are our priorities and how are we going to navigate this, them being seemingly in conflict, because they're all important. And so it takes us back to goal one and the need to engage our communities, because it really will be shaped by the local culture and priorities of the group of people. And yes, maybe they are a bit in conflict, but it forces that conversation. We're so glad that all of you are in this space with us, helping us navigate and figure these things out. You're all so experienced and knowledgeable in this area, and we appreciate that you're here as partners. So thank you this afternoon for your time and expertise. I know, Chair, we have to wrap up with a couple of items of other business, but wanted to see if you had closing comments.
I just wanted to say on behalf of the commission, thank you for your insight, guidance, inquiries. What's great about site visits, at least from my perspective, is I remember them. So, I remember the space and the place and then the people. I might, if I see you in a different context, I might not remember you, but it burns the messages more clearly into the brain. So thank you for taking the time to physically be here with us. And with that, I just have, did you want to say something, Vice Chair?
Say, what an extraordinary day. You have a lot of challenges ahead, but we have learned about the extraordinary work that you're doing, from the wildfire recovery and the resilience and the housing and the Goal 18 work and the urbanization in Newport. And the list just goes on and on and on. So it's really inspiring to see the extraordinary work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't know if Commissioner Jacobson, you want to say anything, because you're both on this table and on that table.
Everybody did a nice job presenting today, so thanks everybody for being here, and it was just really nice to host the commission here, and I'm glad we got a time to get out and see some stuff. I always think about like you said, you always remember the field trip, but what did you do at school the day after the field trip? I don't remember.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we were able to get out and see some stuff, and this thanks to all of you for coming and participating today.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So item 15 on our agenda, which was potential appeal of a Marion County conditional use permit, is not happening at 4 p.m. as originally scheduled on the agenda. The department has decided at this time not to pursue the appeal. So we're going to move on to item 16, which is other business. Director Bateman has some things in other business she would like to bring up first.
There are two items that I thought we should circle back to, and then commissioners may have additional thoughts. But when we first convened yesterday, we started commission business with some comments from commissioners in terms of what they've seen and done recently. And we had two commissioners that were not able to join us that early in the meeting. So I wanted to make sure we circled back and had a chance to hear from Commissioner Boyer and Commissioner Jacobson about what you're thinking these days.
Yeah, it was in relation to your district, your area. What are the top issues that are on top of land use related issues?
Okay. Well, we toured the tragedy in Otis. And the panel, the first panel we had, it triggered something in me today that there was an urban renewal district that was happening in Nelscott. And I think about what happens into taxing districts when there is urban renewal happening, and how many can happen within a county. And when does it become a hardship for a taxing district? I'll use my conservation district as an example. We're extremely modest, $350,000 a year. And cities are knocking for a lot of work. I think we have 5 of them right now. And I know the answer is, but in 10, 20 years, you're going to have all this. But what happens right now, we're about to probably lay off a half-time person because our increases we're going up, but our property tax or, our taxing is not going up. So I struggle a lot with that. And then when I think about my, narrowness of the conservation district, I think about the emergency, the fire, the police, and their taxing districts also. So that's being taken away from them. So that's been on my mind today, just as all of this, when I just think about what's being taken away from them. And I know it's going to be great 20 years from now, but I guess I'm thinking about the here and the now on what's being taken away from fire, water, police. And that was why I wanted to tag on Nate's ear a little bit, but I didn't get all the way through that conversation. What else is, I guess that's really all that's on my mind right now. I didn't know I was going to be doing this, so that's what I got for now.
Yeah, and I guess, well, we all took the tour today, so I think most of my stuff was talked about: wildfire recovery, housing, short-term rentals. Probably the one thing not talked about today a whole lot was climate change, and we're really in a position where I feel like we need some technical assistance to start looking at where are those areas that we're going to lose due to sea level rise, and what do we want to do about it? Parks, roads, infrastructure, et cetera. Kind of like, what's the plan? So that's something I think about. And the other thing I just wanted to say, while I have all of us sort of together in the same room, is I have decided to step down from LCDC and just really feeling like I need to reprioritize my time and kind of where it's going. So I have told director and deputy director that will be happening. And I know we're in a sort of difficult time right now with a governor transition in terms of getting new appointments made. And so I'm going to try to hang on until July, hopefully, so that they can get a new appointment in place and that there's not much of a gap there for all of you. So certainly have enjoyed my time with the DLCD and all of you. It's really nice to meet all of you in person today for the first time.
No.
So hopefully we can stay friends in person after this. But like I said, just have enjoyed my time, but just know it's kind of time to move on and reallocate my my time to some other things. And one of those other things is housing. I just feel like the community really needs kind of a champion for that right now, and that I need to free up some of my time, to go after things like infrastructure that everybody was talking about, right? There's a lot of money out there for local governments right now for infrastructure, but somebody has to do that. I mean, someone has to make that their job to go and do that. So just a hard decision to make for sure. I'll miss all of you and the work that the commission is doing, but just know that it's time to move on to some other things. So thank you.
I was like, no. As long as the O's can go. But that's related to me. That's still in the family. Oh, so sorry to hear that. This was a big deal then, us being at this meeting here, hearing from you. Yeah.
I promised our director I would wait to tell everybody here. So
Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Okay. Any other business to bring up to the commission? I was going to say some stuff, but I didn't know if anybody else. Oh, we were going to talk about the calendar. Let's talk about that. Yes.
What's interesting to me was I heard this kind of the same messaging from this. Oh, sorry. From this panel that the fundamental land use system is working. And that was the same message we got in John Day. So I just thought that was really a neat takeaway from two panels. And two totally different demographics.
If I can tack onto that too, we also heard from John Day and here the difficulty that a lot of these communities are having with their urban growth boundary expansions and how they feel like it would help them improve their communities. And I think that's a really important point for us to remember, especially when we're talking about smaller communities. And I'd be really interested to see, if we can somehow push forward this land swap, not concept, but maybe it's the right word for it, smoothing out the rough details. And maybe we should consider doing that separate from the ONA. I'm not really sure if that's even possible, but if the ONA does go to the legislature decides not to move forward with it, then what do we do? Because it won't be until June or July until we'd even start to be making progress on that. And I feel like that could be, a pretty meaningful chunk of time that we might be able to move some things forward. And I'm not sure if that's my place to say as commissioner, but I would love to see us, take these comments really seriously, because I do think it's something that's holding up our communities massively, especially when we're talking about these smaller rural communities that really are struggling.
And I heard something slightly the same, but different. I heard there's other issues that are not land use related that affect land use greatly. That's what I heard. As far as like the infrastructure, for example. And I know when we were doing House Bill 2001, 2003 work, that was like kind of the side gig harder part, which is like the infrastructure. And it seems to be, it's definitely a reoccurring theme, and it's across the United States. I wasn't joking when I said that. And I don't necessarily feel like anybody's actually been like this. We are tackling this issue. We have a bill. I haven't heard anything like that. And it sounds like it affects every single thing we do. And so that's kind of where I want to see, like, I do agree with you. Like the UGB thing might help a community, really important for this specific area. Awesome. But the infrastructure thing would help every single community. And so it'd be great to have more conversations about that. And it reminds me about similar stuff with the housing, about like building codes, taxation, the things that fall out of our group. However, we have really great leaders in the department who can elevate these issues, and I feel like take responsibility, even though we're not responsible for them. So I feel like we should do that also with infrastructure. Not to add work, but be champions of infrastructure. Schedule.
Yes. Yes, I'll just jump to that. So there were some dates listed in the director's report, and then since then we've been, November seems to be a particularly difficult month for us to schedule in. First of all of our partners are having annual conferences in October, November, so that makes it very difficult. Then we have a holiday in there, two holidays to try to avoid, and AOC conference in particular moving forward is one that we've tried to navigate around. So the dates that are in your director's report, we're pretty comfortable and confident in, except for the November. So I have new dates there for those. And then we'd like to see how your calendars are looking or what you're thinking about this. So we've got in 2023, 4 meetings, going to quarterly meetings, January 25. Well, and so one of the question marks is if we go to fewer meetings, do they need to be slightly longer? So we've given you Wednesday, Thursday, Friday dates, but probably what we're assuming is that Wednesdays will actually be travel days. So maybe meeting up in the evening, but we've given you three dates per meeting just to hold in your calendar at this point. January 25 through 27, April 19 through 21.
This one.
Yes.
Okay. January.
January 25 through 27, April 19 through 21. And both of those meetings will definitely be in Salem because that will coincide with the legislative session. The next 2, I'm not so sure about location, July 19 through 21. And then November, this one differs from what was in the director's report. We're looking at very early in the month to avoid all those other conflicts. What is that? 2 and 3. What is that? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 1, 2, 3. Yes. Yes. So that's 1, 2, 3. So I can only imagine that will create havoc and chaos and scheduling conflicts, but let's see what folks say. Maybe it'll work perfectly for everyone. Question mark? I'm sorry. You do have an invitation for it, but it's that one ended up conflicting with Veterans Day. And then the next week it ended up conflicting again with AOC. Right. So the current proposal is 1, 2, 3.
Since I wasn't here, beginning of the meeting, so we're quarterly, but nothing in between.
Not currently. Not currently.
I want you guys to think about something. Oh, sorry. When it's not right here, is it maybe I mean, I get the quarterly on staff and I'm always very concerned about staff. But I almost feel like a check-in, like a 3-hour in between Zoom call or something, or like maybe even it's our, I was talking about some sort of training going through the exceptions. Maybe that's something we can do in between a meeting, just at like a 3-hour Zoom call or just so there's not a disconnect. Not that that's going to happen, but I think maybe little check-ins in between is just something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering, is this a test year also? Like, you know what I mean? Are we testing this? Because I don't want to be like, okay, we're completely doing this. And then we don't know yet, right? Are there going to be problems with, we have to hear this hearing by this date, and then we end up putting all the meetings back that we could have scheduled out? Because my big concern for me is I got to schedule out. So can we see this as a test year?
That's a good point, Chair. There's 2 things. One, that this could be a test year to see how it goes. It's also a very heavy legislative year. And I imagine coming out of the legislature, we may have some work to do. So I think we would be very happy or very committed to revisiting a schedule for 2024 and see what we need to do.
So maybe one thought is when we have a legislative year, it's maybe it's the shorter schedule, and maybe, when the work piles on, maybe
play
it's
it by year
one.
too. Yeah,
and
we
see
could play it by year.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, we're probably going to be initiating rulemaking here, I would assume, after the session. So we're all going to have probably new liaison roles, which means our time commitments will probably be there as well. So just everyone's understanding.
So I won't know about my schedule till I consult with all the people to find out.
Well, maybe we can just leave it there for now.
When would be the travel? We were talking about travel, would be November, where we go, the not Salem meeting.
That's what I'm thinking. July is so soon after legislative session. The constitutional sine die, I think we said, was June 25th or thereabouts. It's so soon after that I'm guessing we wouldn't be well positioned to travel for the July. Definitely November. We've seen how important it is to be able to get out there.
Can I put a plug in to go to Southern Oregon
You may.
in November?
So I don't know if were any of you on the commission when we had this this drawing of Oregon with stars on it. Do you know this? Steve knows it. It basically showed all the old prior meetings, where they were located, all the most recent meetings, where they're located, with the goal of making sure we go to all of Oregon. And if we haven't been to somewhere in a really long time, to make sure we go there. So I would love to bring that back, just for equitable purposes, to make sure that we're choosing based on that, and or strategically with some work going on. And would we decide that at the January meeting with that, if we get that chart back?
Find
Yeah,
that map and
the
bring
map.
it.
It was nice because visually it showed you where visually you quickly got a sense of this whole place has not been visited, Stars. They were not stars. Oh my God. I remember stars. Yeah.
We can leave that there for now then.
Yeah. It was good for equity purposes. It was good.
Very good. Thank you.
I was going to say, Vice Chair brought out, we should go to Portland. I was like, something I've never thought of, because I'm there all the time. But that is another consideration in the sense of, yeah, I know. We can set up a meeting there. In the sense of, the folks of us in Portland live those issues, and you hear about them all the time, but the other people don't. So that was just an interesting, I had never thought about that. I just had some random thoughts. Is that okay? So I went to 2 conferences this month that I haven't gone to conferences in a really long time. So I thought it was interesting. One is I went to the Urban Land Institute conference, and it was in Dallas, Texas. And I've only been to the conference once before, and it was 7 or 8 years ago. And I remember going, it's Texas, right? And I remember going and thinking feeling very out of place as me, myself in this real estate. It's a real estate development conference. That's where all the real estate developers go. And I remember looking for this one session that was about sustainability and something, and going there and being like, oh, these are my people, I feel comfortable here. And the other sessions were just so bizarre to me. It just made me feel like I was not in the profession that I felt like I was in, because of what we do here in Oregon around sustainability and green building. And it just wasn't the crowd. What was interesting going to this conference, it felt kind of shocking, honestly, because I was in the exact same place. I was in Dallas last time, and then I was Dallas again. And they were like, these are our top, I don't have them exactly, but I think there were 4 priorities. And the ULI was like, we're all about affordable housing, we're all about ESG, and we're all about DEI. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. And then I went to the sessions hearing somebody from, I think, Gensler and the head of ULI, and they were all speaking extremely heavily about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and affordable housing and ESG. And I was kind of in shock. And then I would go to sessions, and they would all be a lot of them were about climate change. And I wasn't seeking these out. These were just the sessions and the way they went. And it was very interesting because it was a completely different audience and the way they were talking about it. And it was all about climate risk and how do we value properties? Are we making different decisions about acquiring, and are we devaluing properties that, all about the risk matrix that developers look at. I was totally blown away by the whole conversation. So I think we've gotten out of the niche sustainability world, and now we are in the mainstream. Climate change is very obvious to everyone, and the markets are responding. So that was very interesting to me. And then I went to Greenbuild conference, which was totally different audience. Everybody's about sustainability and kind of on the forefront of that. Heard Jane Fonda speak, and that was so inspiring, to say the least. Talking a lot about, almost like climate activism, and, really, it's the time is now, and we have to take action. And I just wanted to say it was a strange experience to go back to back on these 2 conferences where they felt aligned, where I think 10 years ago they were completely not aligned. So sometimes I feel like when we're pushing for climate work here, we feel like, oh, we're just doing this in a bubble. This is a national trend. I think another thing that was interesting is I went and heard about a construction cost conversation by national construction companies. These are the issues in the industry right now across the United States. They have 35 offices around the United States. it's as if they were talking about Portland. Like if I didn't know where they were talking about, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's the Portland they're talking about. So it was just very eye opening that this is not a isolated issue. It's actually everywhere. So I just thought it's sometimes nice to get out in the national setting and bring back and be like, oh, okay. And even in settings like we were talking about with no land use regulations, with no whatever, they're facing the exact same issues that we're facing. So I just wanted to bring that insight back. Thank you. I didn't know if any other commissioners had anything more. Okay, that's it. Okay. So now we are going to make sure to fill out our form and sign our papers before we leave. I want to say, yes.
I'm so sorry. I had to Google ESG.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes. Oh my gosh. So ESG, I feel like I'm kind of late to the ESG game myself. Environmental social governance. It is so hot right now. Does anybody know about ESG? Oh my gosh. So for me, I never heard about it. And then suddenly it is absolutely everywhere. And it's basically companies like banks and financial institutions and I think large companies have all started to create ESG, sort of like your 3 pillars of sustainability, right? Goals and requirements. And they've just all started doing it all at the same time. And so everybody's scrambling to be like, what is ESG? Who does ESG? What are the companies that can do my ESG analysis? Yeah. And I mean, I think it's interesting from the environmental side. I'm cautious about the social governance part of it in the sense that the industries haven't really dug into basically like DEI work, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so I'm cautiously optimistic about like what metrics are they going to use to measure that? Is it going to be what I would call like equity washing, like there was greenwashing in the past? What's interesting about the company side is what they're doing a lot now is causing suppliers, like people on the kind of, the big companies are saying this, and then the people at the kind of bottom of the supply chain are having to react quite quickly, which is kind of interesting. So I feel like, yeah, it's a very big movement right now in the world.
You know how like when a rock star makes it big and you say, wow, that was overnight. It was actually decades in the making. So that's actually the industry I came out of. And it's the industry I started my career with. And it has its roots, in the 60s, 70s, Vietnam, sort of how are companies behaving aside from their financial performance. And so this is what the divestment during the apartheid movement was all about. It's what divestment during Burma and Iran were all about. Exxon Valdez, who was spilling what kind of crap into what sort of water bodies, how are they treating the environment, how are they treating their workers, all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of how I came here to natural resources policy, was starting by looking at how companies were behaving on the landscape and whether there was any policy or system that was regulating or shaping their corporate behavior aside from their financial behavior. So it's all very interesting, and it turns out there's no perfect company. And I'd love to talk to you more about it if you have time.
People are now having scores, and people are looking at their scores, and it's putting in the shareholder reports, judging, investing, not investing based on ESG metrics.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us. Our next commission is scheduled for January 26th through 27th in Salem, Oregon. Is that the correct date? Yeah. We are now adjourned. Thank you.